For the entirety of human history, we have viewed aging as a biological inevitability. But if you look at the smartest capital on Earth right now, they have completely abandoned that worldview. To Silicon Valley, death is no longer destiny. It is an engineering problem. Altus Labs launched with a $3 billion seed round. Sam Altman wrote a $180 million check to Retro Biosciences. Why? Because longevity is the ultimate total addressable market. 8 billion people, infinite demand, zero price ceiling. But the real question isn't why they want to solve it. The question is, why now? Why? After decades of snake oils and failed pills, are the architects of the digital age suddenly convinced that aging is a solvable equation? Welcome to Growth. I'm Shen, your guide to money and navigating the frontier of innovation. Today, we are going to dismantle the biological narrative you have been fed your entire life. We will start with the information theory to show you why aging is a software bug, not a hardware failure, and how AI is being used to literally format the hard drive of a human cell. From there, we will expose the regulatory Trojan Horse startups are using to bypass FDA and map out the geopolitical arms race quietly raging between Washington, Beijing, and the sovereign wealth funds of the Middle East. Finally, we will break down the macro shock, why achieving the unprecedented lifespan will fundamentally break the very consensus of the global economy. To understand the capital flowing into longevity, we have to fundamentally change how we think about human body. For the last century, medicine operated on the mechanical model. We thought of the body like a car. You drive a car for 80 years. The engine parts grind together, the belt snaps, the metal rusts. We thought aging was simply wear and tear, accumulated mechanical damage to our cells over decades. But there is a fatal flaw in that logic. A car cannot rebuild its own engine. Your body prints new cells every single day. Biology doesn't rust. The mechanical model is dead. It has been replaced by a new paradigm, the information theory of aging. And it is this exact theory that is moving billions of dollars today. To understand this, we need to separate your biology into hardware and software. Your DNA is the digital hardware. It is the raw code. And here's the fascinating part. If we take a skin cell from 80-year-old and sequence it, the underlying genetic code is still largely pristine. The hardware isn't broken. The problem is the software. The software is called epigenome. Think of it as a physical system of chemical tags, switches that sit on top of your DNA. Since every cell in your body has the exact same DNA, it is the epigenome that tells a generic stem cell, turn these specific genes on and become a heart muscle, or turn these genes off and become a neuron. But over time, exposure to radiation, stress, and cell division causes these chemical switches to get stuck. The system accumulates noise. The cells literally forget their identity. A heart cell forgets it is a heart cell and stops pumping efficiently. That loss of information is what aging actually is. When a cell loses its identity, the biological protocol is simple: apoptosis, programmed cell death. The cell is supposed to effectively delete itself for the good of the system. But some cells refuse to die. They hit the emergency brake and enter a state of permanent arrest. Informally, they are zombie cells. Originally, this was an evolutionary defense mechanism. The body freezes a damaged cell so it doesn't mutate and turn into cancer. It is a biological quarantine. But here's where the network fails. These zombie cells don't just sit quietly in the dark. They are metabolically active and they start screaming. They secrete a highly toxic cocktail of inflammatory cytokines, chemokines, and tissue-degrading enzymes. We call this the senescence-associated secretory phenotype. or SASP. This isn't just local damage. It is a biological contagion. When a zombie cell secretes SASP, it melts the extracellular matrix around it. It causes neighboring, completely healthy cells to panic, malfunction, and also become senescent. It also exhausts the local immune system. Your body is constantly deploying white blood cells to clear these zombie cells out. But eventually, as the noise accumulates, the immune system gets overwhelmed and simply gives up. Studies show that even just 1% to 2% of the cells in organ become senescent. They can severely degrade the function of the other 98%. One zombie cell corrupts the tissue corrupts the organ, and the organ brings down the systemic network. Aging is not mechanical wear and tear. It is a cascading network failure of lost information and spreading cellular corruption. So, if aging is a software bug, how can you fix it? You run a factory reset. In 2006, Dr. Shinya Yamanaka discovered 4 specific proteins, which we now call the OSKM factors. He proved that if you introduce these 4 proteins into an adult cell, it physically wipes the epigenetic slate clean, forcing the cell to revert to its embryonic state. We aren't talking about slowing down aging. We are talking about literal biological age reversal. But immediately, the field hit a massive engineering bottleneck. In 2013, researchers attempted to turn these Yamanaka factors inside a living mouse. It was a biological bomb. If you hold the reset button down for too long, the cell completely forgets its identity. It turns into a teratoma, a massive, disorganized tumor. You don't want that in your heart. You want a young heart cell. Early experiments that left these factors turned on simply killed the animal in a matter of days. Always doing this in a petri dish is one thing. Doing it in a living, breathing mammal is a monumental control theory problem. How do you de-age an organism without erasing its biological hard drive? For years, the entire industry was stuck. Then, in late 2016, a team at the Salk Institute broke the wall. They realized they didn't need a new protein. They needed a genetic on-off switch. They delivered the Yamanaka factors into the cells of a mouse, but engineered them to remain completely dormant. They would only activate if the mouse was given a very specific molecular trigger, a drug called doxycycline. These unlocked the solution the industry uses today, partial reprogramming. Instead of holding the reset button down to 0, they just tapped it. They turned the Yamanaka factors on for just 2 to 4 days to clear the accumulated epigenetic noise, and then shut them off right before the cell crossed the point of no return. The results were a paradigm shift. There were no tumors. The cells successfully cleared their aging noise, but remembered their identity. The mice didn't just look younger. Their cardiovascular systems healed, and their lifespan increased by 30%. Once they proved partial reprogramming was possible, the entire academia pivoted, triggering a massive cascade of the global research. In late 2020, Dr. David Sinclair's team at Harvard further isolated the bottleneck. The M in OSKM is a notorious cancerogen. By stripping it out to create a safer OSK trio, they proved you could still clear the epigenetic noise and de-age the tissue without triggering a tumor. They injected this directly into the eyes of older mice and successfully restored lost vision and repaired damaged retinal nerves. Then Genentech collaborated with Salk to push the timeline further. In 2022, they proved that partial reprogramming safely reversed the signs of aging in normal, healthy middle-aged mice, not just genetically modified sick ones, allowing their skin to heal without scarring. We have isolated the biological mechanism of age reversal. We have proven that the genetic code can be safely rebooted in a living mammal without causing cancer. But having the science is only half the battle. Even though curing aging in a lab gets you a Nobel Prize, curing it in a human requires billions of dollars in risk capital. Welcome to the financial chasm. Capital markets operate in quarters. Biological trials operate in decades. If you invent a drug that extends the human lifespan by 20 years, you cannot run a 60-year clinical trial to prove it to Wall Street. You'd run out of money. The industry needed a time machine. They needed a way to measure age, not by the calendar, but by the molecule. Here's where the epigenetic clock enters. In 2013, a biostatistician named Steve Horvath did something remarkable. He analyzed the epigenetic tags, the software switches we talked about, across thousands of different human tissue samples. He realized that as we age, these switches don't just degrade randomly. They degrade in a highly predictable mathematical pattern. By looking at just a few hundred specific DNA methylation sites, he could calculate the exact biological degradation of a tissue, regardless of whether it came from a liver, a lung, or a drop of blood. This permanently decoupled chronological age from biological age. Your driver's license might say you're 50, but your epigenetic clock could prove your cells are functionally 60, or more importantly, 40. This single mathematical discovery changes the entire business model of longevity. We don't have to wait decades for a patient to die to see if a drug worked. We can give a patient an experimental reprogramming drug, wait 6 months, run a blood test, and definitively prove to investors that their biological age has reversed by 5 years. The clock compresses a multi-decade clinical trial into a single fiscal year. The epigenetic clock gave us the map, but artificial intelligence gave us the engine. To understand why AI is the ultimate catalyst for longevity, we have to understand the flaw in the Yamanaka factors. Nature spends billions of years evolving the Yamanaka proteins, but they evolved for a very specific purpose, embryogenesis. They evolved to build a fetus from scratch. They did not evolve to safely rejuvenate the heart tissue of 65-year-old adult. Using natural Yamanaka factors to cure aging is like using a sledgehammer to perform neurosurgery. We don't need nature's proteins. We need bespoke, engineered molecules. In traditional pharmaceuticals, finding a new molecule takes a decade. You physically test millions of compounds in a wet lab, one by one, hoping something binds to the right receptor. It is blind, agonizing trial and error. AI completely eliminates the wet lab bottleneck. To a large language model, biology is just data. Proteins are simply sequence of amino acids. They have a syntax, they have a grammar. If an AI can learn the grammatical rules of the English to write an essay, it can learn the grammatical rules of proteomics to fold a protein. In 2025, we saw the breakthrough. Startups like Retro Biosciences, backed by Sam Altman, stopped searching for proteins in nature and started generating them from scratch. This is called de novo protein design. They use massive custom AI models trained on billions of biological interactions. They asked AI to design a protein that does exactly what the Yamanaka factors do, wipe the epigenetic slate clean, but with a built-in safety switch. And this is where AI does something incredible. It hallucinates. People hear the word hallucinate in AI, and they think of a chatbot lying to them about a historical fact. But in deep tech, a hallucination is not a bug. It is the entire point. When an AI hallucinates a sequence of amino acids that has never existed in the training data, it isn't making a mistake. It is exploring the latent space of physics to invent a novel molecule. In a chatbot, a hallucination is a lie. In biology, a hallucination is a patent. When tested, these AI-generated proteins were engineered with perfect binding affinity. They attach to the epigenome, clear the noise rapidly, and detach before causing any genomic instability. They achieved a 50-fold higher expression of rejuvenation markers than nature's proteins, with zero risk of tumor formation. A process that should have taken evolution 1,000,000 years and traditional pharma 10 years took a cluster of GPUs few weeks. And this brings us to the interim answer. This is the synthesis. If you want to know why the smartest money, the sovereign wealth funds, the tech billionaires, the institutional capital, is pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into longevity right now, it is because of this exact convergence. For the last century, we didn't even know what aging was. We were treating mechanical wear and tear. But today, look at the landscape. First, we have the information theory. We finally understand that aging is a software bug, not a hardware failure. Second, we have the factory reset. We have the biological mechanism to physically reboot the cell. Third, we have the epigenetic clock. We have the molecular tape measure to definitively prove age reversal to the capital markets in 6 months instead of 60 years. Finally, we have infinite compute. We have generative AI designing the exact bespoke molecules needed to execute the reset safely. For the first time in human history, we have the theory to understand the bug, the clock to measure the reset, and the compute to generate the patch. The R&D timeline has collapsed. This is why capital is moving. They are not betting on a distant sci-fi future. They are pricing in the total addressable market of human mortality today. But even if you have a perfect AI and functional time machine, you hit a massive structural hurdle, the FDA. Why does the FDA matter so much? Because they are the ultimate gatekeeper of the total addressable market. It doesn't matter if you cure aging in a lab. If you cannot get an approved clinical indication from the FDA, you cannot legally sell the drug. And this is where the longevity ventures face a 100-year-old regulatory brick wall. The FDA is fundamentally designed to evaluate treatments for diseases. And according to the US Code of Federal Regulation, the FDA explicitly considers aging to be a natural biological process, not a disease. You cannot file an investigational new drug application for getting older. Furthermore, the FDA does not currently recognize biological age clocks as valid surrogate endpoints for trials. If you cannot prove efficacy against a specific recognized illness, you cannot get to the market. Therefore, the entire longevity sector is utilizing a strategy of regulatory arbitrage. It is a Trojan horse. They target highly specific, localized, FDA-recognized age-related diseases. And this strategy is working. In January 2026, we witnessed a historic milestone. The FDA cleared the first ever human clinical trial for a partial epigenetic reprogramming therapy. A Boston-based company called Life Biosciences, co-founded by Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard, is taking their reprogramming gene therapy called ER100 into phase 1 trials. But they're not treating aging. They're targeting severe age-related eye diseases, open-angle glaucoma and NAION, which is essentially a stroke of the optic nerve. They're delivering the OSK gene therapy directly into the eye. The eye provides a perfectly contained measurable environment to prove that the therapy safely restores the damaged retinal cells to a younger functional state. This is the wedge. Once a therapy like ER100 proves it can safely clear the epigenetic noise and restore function in the optic nerve, the regulatory precedent is set. From there, the data scales organ by organ. Once the safety profile is established, physicians can legally prescribe it off-label, and the door to systemic, whole-body age reversal swings open. Now, let's zoom out. If you think this is just a story about Silicon Valley startups fighting the FDA, you're missing the macro picture. If US regulators move too slowly, the rest of the world is more than happy to take the monopoly. Longevity is no longer just a biotech sector. It's geopolitical arms race. First, we look to the east. China has a massive existential vulnerability. Their demographics are collapsing faster than any major economy in history. They understand that extending human lifespan isn't a luxury. It is a strict national security imperative. And they are treating it like a state-sponsored moonshot. To understand how seriously the Chinese Communist Party takes this, you have to look at something called 981 Leaders Health Project. For decades, the CCP has run a highly secretive, state-backed medical initiative exclusively for its top political and military elite. The stated, documented goal of Project 981 is to extend the lifespan of senior officials to 150 years. They do this through a mercilessly optimized protocol of preventative genomics, regenerative stem cell therapies, and advanced geroscience. But this isn't just for elite anymore. The state is weaponizing this research. China has rapidly established the world's largest disease control and genomic sequencing networks. They don't have the same bioethical red tape as the West. They can mandate clinical trials at a scale and speed that is illegal in the United States. They're aggressively trying to corner the intellectual property of human aging. Next, we look at the old world, Europe. There is a persistent, romantic myth among investors that Europe is the heart of global biotech. People think of European pharma giants. Let me be clear, that's obsolete. They were the heart of biotech. Today, they're a museum. In the 1990s, Europe accounted for half of all global pharmaceutical R&D. Today, that number has plummeted. Why? Because of the precautionary principle. Europe has legislated itself into a corner. If a startup wants to run an advanced epigenetic trial in the EU, they have to navigate a fragmented nightmare of 27 different national health ministries, suffocating data privacy laws, and structural lack of deep venture capital. The result is a massive brain drain. The smartest molecular biologists in Oxford, Munich, and Paris are taking the first flight to Boston or San Francisco. Europe is bleeding talent because they prioritized regulation over innovation. Finally, we have the dark horse, the Middle East. Saudi Arabia and the UAE has absolutely zero legacy biotech background. They do not have 100-year-old pharmaceutical institutions. But they have two things Europe does not: absolute monarchies and infinite sovereign wealth. The Middle East is attempting to literally buy the entire longevity industry. Saudi Arabia launched the Evolution Foundation, backed by their sovereign wealth fund. They are deploying a mandate of $1 billion a year strictly into aging research and geroscience startups. Meanwhile, the UAE is building entire medical free zones. If a cutting-edge longevity startup is blocked by the US FDA, Abu Dhabi's pitch is simple. Move your lab here. We will fully fund you. We will give you zero taxes. And the king will personally decree a custom regulatory sandbox for your clinical trials. They are using oil money to buy the cure for time, because they know that the country that controls the patent on human lifespan owns the 21st century. If you strip away the biotech hype, what is the actual macroscopic picture here? It comes down to a single systemic vulnerability. The baseline of global economy is not the interest rate, it is the actuarial table. Every pension fund, every annuity provider, and every sovereign wealth fund on Earth treats the human body as an asset with a fixed depreciation schedule. They assume a predictable mortality rate. Financially speaking, the entire system relies on you expiring on time. If this industry succeeds, even marginally, and people suddenly live just 5 to 10 years longer than expected, pension funds simply do not have the capital to pay them. To hedge this, institutional money uses derivatives called mortality swaps, where investment banks insure pension funds against people living too long. If we achieve the escape velocity of lifespan, the entire architecture of global retirement faces immediate systemic insolvency. But there's also a massive flip side. Look at the collapsing birth rates in the West and in East Asia. We're facing a global demographic inversion. Soon, there will not be enough young workers to support the massive aging population. But if we extend health span, if we keep people biologically and economically productive into their 80s and 90s, we solve the inversion. We turn a structural collapse into a massive demographic dividend. For all of human history, death has been the ultimate timeline. It dictated the timeline of our lives. When we learn, when we build, when we take risks, and when we retire. If your productive, healthy life is suddenly 100 years instead of 60, how does that alter the compound interest of your life's work? How does it change the level of risk you are willing to take? The cure for aging isn't just a medical breakthrough. It is a civilizational reset. And it is a structural repricing of time itself. So here's the real question for you. When these technology scales, who gets it first? If age reversal treatments are patented by sovereign wealth funds and billionaires, are we about to create a permanent biological caste system where the elite live indefinitely and rest of us expire on schedule? Or will governments be forced to subsidize your rejuvenation just to keep you in the workforce at 95? Let me know your take in the comments below. This was Sean from BioSpark. If you enjoyed the video, press like, subscribe, and don't forget the notification button. And if you want the deep dive report with full citations and the market breakdown, subscribe to our newsletter at the link below. Thank you for watching. Until next time.